I'm 42, and I've been married to my husband Mark for 15 years. I thought by now we'd be in that comfortable stage of life where surprises meant weekend trips or a new coffee maker. Not what happened last month. It started the morning I got back from visiting my sister out of state. I'd been gone for 9 days, and while I was away, Mark said he'd be working late a lot and catching up on projects. When I walked into our house, I noticed right away that the air felt wrong. Not bad, exactly, but different. There was a faint smell of perfume I didn't recognize, and the living room was arranged slightly differently, like someone had been trying to make it cozy in a way that wasn't ours. At first, I brushed it off. I'd been gone. Maybe Mark had done some spring cleaning or moved things around. But then I went into our bedroom. My favorite quilt, the one I keep folded at the end of the bed, was missing. In its place was a completely different blanket, one I'd never seen before. When I asked Mark about it later, he just said he found it in the closet and thought it was nice. But here's the thing. I know what's in our closets. That blanket wasn't from there. It got stranger. That evening, when I was unpacking, I noticed a wine glass in the dishwasher. Not unusual in itself, except there were lipstick smudges on it, and I haven't worn lipstick in I didn't say any yet, but I felt a prickle in my gut. The kind you try to ignore because you love could never, but still, I couldn't shake it. So that night, while Mark was in the shower, I checked the laundry. Buried under his clothes was a silky scarf that didn't belong to me. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I decided to watch, to wait. I had a feeling something, or someone, was about to step out of the shadows. The next morning, I woke up before Mark and went downstairs to make coffee. That's when I noticed something I had completely missed the night before. A pair of women's slippers tucked neatly beside the couch. They weren't mine, and they weren't new. They looked worn in, like someone had been using them for a while. I stood there staring at them, my heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was that maybe my mother-in-law had visited while I was gone, but I knew that was impossible. She'd been in Florida all month, and besides, she doesn't wear that size. I slid the slippers slightly apart with my foot, just enough to see the label inside, a brand I'd never even heard of. I made the coffee, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. I sat at the table, listening. Every creak of the house made me wonder if there was someone upstairs. The strange thing was, I didn't hear anything. No movement, no doors shutting, just the sound of Mark's shower turning off. When he came down, he acted normal, too normal, asking about my trip, telling me about some minor plumbing issue he'd taken care of while I was away. He didn't even notice me watching his every move. After breakfast, he went outside to check the mail, and that's when I noticed something else. Our guest room door was closed. We never keep it shut. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. The bed was perfectly made, but there was an unfamiliar tote bag on the floor. Inside were a hairbrush, a phone charger, and a paperback book with a receipt sticking out like a bookmark. The receipt was dated 3 days ago from a store 2 towns over. Mark had told me he hadn't gone anywhere that week except work at the grocery store. My hands started to shake. Whoever had been in my home while I was gone hadn't just visited, they'd stayed, and I was starting to think they might still be close. That night, I could barely sleep. Every sound made me jolt awake, the house settling, the wind outside, even the hum of the fridge. Mark fell asleep instantly, but I kept staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail I'd noticed. The blanket, the slippers, the tote bag. Around 2 a.m., I decided to get some water. As I walked past the guest room, I saw it, the faintest strip of light leaking out from underneath the door. My stomach dropped. I had definitely left that room dark earlier. I stood there frozen, listening. At first, there was nothing, but then I heard the soft rustle of movement, like fabric shifting. I backed away, heart thudding so hard I thought it would wake Mark. I slipped back into our bedroom and shook him gently. He mumbled something about being tired and turned away from me. I whispered that there was someone in the guest room. He didn't even open his eyes. He just muttered, "Go back to sleep. You're imagining things." But I knew I wasn't. I waited until the house was silent again and crept back out, pressing my ear to the guest room door. Nothing. No movement. No breathing. I slowly turned the handle, but it was locked from the inside. We don't lock that door. We never have. My mind raced. Who locks themselves inside someone else's guest room in the middle of the night? Why was Mark I went back to bed without trying again, but I barely closed my eyes until morning. When I finally got the courage to check the room after breakfast, the door was unlocked, the tote bag and the bed was rumpled like someone had left in a hurry. Mark said, and that was the moment. Whatever was, he wasn't going to tell me. I'd have to find out. By the next day, my fear had shifted into something, determination. If Mark wasn't going to the truth, it myself. I started small. While he was out running errands, I tucked a few subtle markers around the guest room. Hairpins under the pillow, a strand of thread across the inside of the doorframe. My phone angled discreetly between 2 books on the shelf with the camera pointed toward the bed. Nothing obvious, just enough to know if someone came and went. Then I did the same in the kitchen. A spoon balanced carefully on the edge of a sugar jar, a post-it note stuck to the inside of a cabinet door where it wouldn't be seen unless it was opened. I wanted proof that someone was moving through my house when I wasn't around. That evening, Mark acted like everything was normal again. He made dinner, asked about my sister, even suggested we watch a movie together, but I couldn't relax. Every time I glanced toward the guest room, I thought about that locked door and the missing tote bag. Just before bed, I checked my phone. The camera app showed a new record, triggered sometime when I was out buying groceries. I clicked play. The footage was short, only a few seconds, but it was enough. A woman stepped into the frame, her back to the, pulling a hoodie over. She walked to the bed, lifted the pin. The hairpins I'd hidden there clattered to. She didn't know. I paused the video, zooming in on the side of her. She bent to pick. I didn't recognize her, but I would. When I slid into bed beside Mark, I said nothing. I just listened to him breathe, pretending to sleep, while my mind worked over the one question I couldn't who was. The next morning, Mark left, saying he had a meeting. As soon as his car was out of sight, went straight for the guest room. The bed was made again, too neatly. Whoever she was, she wanted it to had been there. But the pillow I'd marked with a tiny stitch of red thread had been flipped. The spoon in the sugar jar? Gone. My post-it inside the cabinet, crumpled in the trash. She'd been here. Again. I replayed the camera footage from the day before, this time watching every frame. Her hoodie slipped just enough to show part of her hair, dark, with a streak of blonde at the front. Something about it nagged. I opened my laptop and started searching. I went through Mark's social media first, his friends list, old photos, tagged pictures. Nothing jumped out. Then I clicked into his following list, scrolling until I found her. Her name was Erin. The profile picture was enough to make my stomach drop. The streak of blonde, the shape of her jaw. It was her. And when I clicked her page, the pieces began to fall into place. Photos of her and Mark from years ago. Comments that felt a little too familiar, even recently. And then the worst one, posted just a week ago. A blurry shot of a wine glass on a table, captioned, "Sometimes the best company is someone who knows you better than you know yourself." The background in the photo? My dining room. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my laptop. She hadn't just been staying here. She was posting about it, publicly, and Mark, he had to know. I stared at that picture for a long time, every nerve in my body buzzing. This wasn't just some stranger. This was someone from his past, and she wasn't leaving. I didn't want to wait until Mark got home. I didn't trust myself to sit there all day, stewing in it, replaying those images in my mind. So I called him. He answered on the second ring, his voice casual, almost cheerful. I told him we needed to talk. Now. No waiting until tonight. At first he tried to brush me off, saying he was busy, but when I didn't back down, he sighed and said he'd come home. The moment he walked through the door, I could see the shift in his expression, like he already knew I'd found something. I didn't waste time. I pulled up Erin's profile on my phone and shoved it toward him. I told him I knew she'd been here, that I'd seen her in the guest room, that she'd been posting pictures from inside our home. For a moment, he didn't say anything. His jaw clenched, his eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me, and then he gave me the kind of half-smile that made my skin crawl. He said I was overreacting, that Erin had just been passing through, and needed somewhere to crash for a few nights. He claimed it was nothing more than friendship, that I was letting my imagination run wild, but I'd seen the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I told him I'd set up cameras, that I had footage of her in the house while I was gone. That made him go quiet, just for a second before he shook his head and said I was violating his privacy. His privacy, not our privacy. That was the moment I realized there was no misunderstanding here. He wasn't going to admit anything, no matter what proof I had, and if I wanted answers, I'd have to get them from Erin herself. I didn't message Erin right away. I wanted her to think I was still in the dark, that I hadn't pieced everything together yet. Instead, I waited until Mark left for work 2 days later. Then I drove to the cafe listed on her most recent check-in. It was one of those quiet, out-of-the-way places with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and there she was, sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee like she didn't have a care in the world. Dark hair with that streak of blonde, just like in the photo. I walked up to her table and said her name. She looked up slowly, and the smirk that spread across her face told me everything before I even opened my mouth. She knew who I was. I told her I wanted to make something clear. Whatever was going on between her and Mark, it was ending now. I expected denial, maybe feigned confusion, but instead she laughed. She said Mark had told her I wouldn't understand, that our marriage had been over for a long time. She claimed he'd invited her to stay because he needed someone who actually supported him. And then she leaned in, like she couldn't wait to twist the knife, and said she wasn't going anywhere, that he'd promised her she could stay as long as it takes. I stood there for a second, gripping the edge of the table to keep from shaking. She didn't look smug anymore. She looked certain that she had the upper hand. I left without saying another word, but as I drove home, my mind was already working. If she thought she was comfortable now, I was about to make sure she never felt that way again. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, Mark told me he had a late meeting and wouldn't be home until after 10. I knew better. I'd left one of the cameras active in the guest room, hidden this time in a different spot. At 8:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the feed and there they were. Erin was lying across the bed in leggings and a tank top, scrolling on her phone, while Mark sat beside her, leaning back against the headboard like he'd done it 100 times before. They weren't touching, at first, but then he reached over, took her phone from her hand, and set it on the nightstand. She laughed, and he leaned in close enough that I didn't need to hear the audio to know what was happening, and then it happened. He kissed her, not a peck, not some innocent brush of lips, but the kind of kiss that leaves no room for doubt. I watched until my stomach turned, then I shut the feed, sat there in the dark living room, and felt something inside me harden. It wasn't sadness anymore, not even rage. It was clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do next, and it wasn't going to involve begging him for an explanation. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I made coffee, asked about his meeting, even kissed his cheek before he left for work. Inside, I was already mapping everything out. First, I called a locksmith. By noon, every exterior lock in the house had been replaced. I told the locksmith it was a security precaution. He didn't ask questions. Then I packed up everything in the guest room. Every blanket, pillow, and drawer emptied into 2 large plastic bins. I didn't bother folding anything. I taped the lids shut and stacked them neatly by the front door. The last step was waiting until evening. I knew Mark wouldn't be home right away. He'd make his usual detour. At exactly 7 p.m., I texted him and Erin a single group message. "Your things are packed. You're both no longer welcome here." 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with call after call. First from Mark, then from an unfamiliar number I assumed was hers. I didn't answer. When they finally pulled into the driveway together, I was standing on the porch with the bins at my feet. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to them, then to the street. Mark's face went red. Erin's went pale. She muttered something to him, but he didn't move to pick up the bins. Instead, he tried to step past me into the house, only to find his key didn't work. The look on his face when I said, "Told you, you're not welcome here," was better than any confrontation could. I shut the door before either of them could respond. For the first time in weeks, I slept through. No creaking guest room door, no perfume lingering in, no lowers drifting, just silence. By morning, my phone was full of Mark had gone furious to pitiful text after embarrassed, how I'd misunderstood how we could still work this out. Erin's tone was smug, laced with little digs about "He'll always come back to me." I didn't reply to either. 2 days later, Mark showed up alone, standing on the porch like nothing had happened. He asked to talk. I let him say his piece, how Erin meant nothing, how he'd been confused, how he didn't want to throw away 15 years of marriage over a mistake. I told him the truth, that the marriage had already been over the moment he let her into our home without my consent, that every kiss, every shared moment with her under my roof was something I'd never forgive or forget. When I closed the door that time, I locked it without hesitation. A week later, I filed for divorce. My lawyer told me the footage I had made things very straightforward. Erin posted a few more vague, self-congratulatory updates online, but they stopped after I sent a legal notice through my attorney. Now the house is mine again. The quiet feels different, like it belongs to me. I've started rearranging the rooms, repainting walls, stripping away anything that still carries the ghost of them. I thought I'd feel broken at this point, but instead I feel lighter. It's not the life I pictured when I married Mark, but it's mine, and that's enough. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that betrayal rarely starts big. It's in the small shifts, the blanket you didn't put on the bed, the locked door you never locked, the smile your spouse doesn't quite give you anymore. And if you ignore those signs long enough, one day you wake up and realize a stranger has been living in your house all along.